The stranger at the door. Rain fell heavy that night, striking the windows of James's small house like 1,000 tiny fists. The streets outside were almost empty, washed clean by the storm. But when James opened his door to check if the gutter was overflowing, he froze. A figure sat on the steps, curled like a shadow. The rain had soaked through a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her skin glowed faintly under the flickering streetlight. Not like human skin. It had a silver-blue tone, marked by faint lines that shimmered as if light itself was trapped. Beneath, James's first thought was that she was injured. His second was that she was not human. She lifted her head slowly, and her eyes caught his, large, bright, filled with something he couldn't name, fear, hunger, and a quiet plea. I can work, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I clean, I cook, anything, just don't send me away. James stood in the doorway, unsure. He was just a simple man, a quiet worker who lived alone. He had never spoken to an alien before. Not this close, sure, the galaxy was wide and full of different beings, but most never set foot on his little street. This girl, no, this young alien woman, looked completely lost. The rain kept falling. The night stretched. His heart fought his head. His head told him to close the door, to stay away from trouble. His heart whispered that if he walked away, he would never forgive himself. Finally, he sighed. You can come inside. Just for tonight, but only to work, understand? Her face lit up with relief. She staggered to her feet, nearly collapsing. James caught her arm, surprised by how light she felt, like she had not eaten properly in weeks. He guided her into the small living room. The scent of rain and dirt filled the air as she stepped in, dripping water on the floor. She looked around carefully, like every corner of the house mattered. Her fingers brushed the shelves, the old wooden table, the faded curtains. She seemed more curious than afraid now, like she was stepping into a different world. What's your name? James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She hesitated. Lyra, she said softly. The name seemed to echo in the air, foreign yet gentle. James gave her a towel and pointed toward the kitchen. If you want to work, you can start there. The dishes are stacked, the counters need cleaning. She nodded quickly, as if the chance to work was a gift. She moved with quiet purpose, her hands trembling but steadying with each plate she touched. James watched for a moment, then turned, away, unsure why his chest felt tight. Hours passed. The storm outside grew wilder, but inside the small house began to change. The clutter disappeared under her careful hands. The air smelled faintly fresher. Her movements were strange. Too precise, almost graceful. Like cleaning was not just work, but a ritual. When she finished, she returned to the living room. She stood there, dripping hair clinging to her face, eyes lowered. Thank you, she whispered. For food. May I? James felt a pang. He had not even thought about offering her dinner. He pulled out some bread and stew, setting it on the table. She sat carefully, almost like she was afraid the chair might reject her. She ate slowly, every bite filled with gratitude. As she ate, James noticed the scars on her arms, thin lines that glowed faintly in the dim light. They were not human scars. They looked like burns or marks from some strange tool. He wanted to ask, but stopped himself. Something in her silence told him she had run from something dark. When she finally finished, she folded her hands in her lap. I will sleep outside if you want. Porch is fine. James shook his head. You'll get sick. There's a couch here. You can use it, just don't touch anything else. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. I will not, she promised. She lay down carefully, curling into herself like a child. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing soft. James stood in the doorway watching her, unease in his chest. She was harmless, or so it seemed, but why was she here? Why in his house on his street in the middle of the storm? And why did he feel like his quiet life had just shifted forever? The rain continued to pound outside. The night was long. James returned to his room, but he could not sleep. The image of her glowing scars stayed in his mind. The sound of her whisper echoed in his ears. He had let a stranger into his home, but something inside him warned, This was no ordinary stranger. This was the beginning of something he could not yet understand. And outside, in the shadows of the storm, unseen eyes were already watching the house. The storm had passed by morning, but James woke to a strange stillness. The air in the house felt heavier, as if someone had filled the walls with secrets during the night. He rubbed his eyes and walked into the living room, expecting to see Lyra still asleep on the couch, but the blanket was folded neatly, and she was gone. His heart jumped. For a moment he thought she had stolen something, but when he looked around, everything was in place. In fact, the house looked cleaner than it had in years. The wooden floor shone, the shelves were dusted, even the windows were washed clear despite the storm. It was unsettling, like ghosts had worked in the night. James found her in the kitchen. She was kneeling by the sink, humming softly in a low alien tone. Her hands moved with a rhythm, scrubbing a pot that looked older than both of them. The sound she made was not human music. It was like a vibration that touched the air itself, and for a moment James felt as if the walls were listening. "You didn't have to do all this," James said, his voice rough. She looked up quickly, startled. Her eyes glowed faintly in the morning light. "Work is payment," she whispered. "I keep my word." James frowned. He should have felt relief, but instead a chill moved through him. That humming. He could still feel it inside his chest, like it had reached deeper than sound should. Breakfast was quiet. Lyra ate only a little bread and fruit. She chewed carefully as though every bite mattered. James wanted to ask her more about her past, but when her gaze met his, the words died. There was a weight in her eyes, something that warned him not to dig too deep. Not yet. After breakfast, James tried to focus on his work, but something distracted him. Every time he moved from one room to another, it felt as if someone was already there. The air carried faint whispers like voices slipping away when he turned. Once, he swore he heard footsteps upstairs, but when he checked, the rooms were empty. "Did you hear that?" he asked suddenly, standing in the hallway. Lyra tilted her head, listening. Her glowing scars dimmed slightly. "They are only echoes," she said, as if that explained everything. James's skin prickled. Echoes of what? She didn't answer. Instead, she bent down to pick up the blanket from the couch and folded it again. Her silence spoke louder than words. That evening, James tried to push the unease away. He told himself the storm had made him jumpy. Maybe the house was just settling. Old houses did that, but when night returned, the whispers came back. He lay in bed. Staring at the ceiling outside, the crickets sang. Inside, something else sang with them. A faint humming rising and falling like a lullaby. He sat up and followed the sound. His steps were slow, his breath shallow. The humming led him to the living room. Lyra was curled on the couch, fast asleep. Her lips were closed, but the sound still filled the air. The glow of her scars pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. James's chest tightened. It was beautiful, haunting, and wrong all at once. He stepped closer and the sound stopped. Silence fell heavy. Lyra stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at him with quiet calm. "You cannot sleep," she whispered. James swallowed. That sound, it wasn't coming from outside, it was from you. Her gaze didn't waver. "It keeps the hunters away," she said softly. The words struck like a blade. James felt cold. "Hunters?" She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket closer to her small frame. "If I do not sing, they find me. They always find me." James stepped back, his heart pounding. His safe, ordinary home had become something else, something alive with secrets. He had let her in, and now he realized she carried danger. With her, danger that hummed through the walls and into the night. Still, when he looked at her, trembling and tired, he felt pity. She was not lying, not trying to scare him. The fear in her voice was real. It was the fear of someone who had been chased. "For too long you said you'd just clean," James muttered, more to himself than to her. "But you've brought trouble to my door." Her voice cracked as she answered. "I only brought myself." The silence that followed was heavy. James wanted to send her away, but his chest refused the thought. Something about her, the scars, the eyes, the broken way she whispered, would not let him turn her out. That night, James lay awake for hours. He listened to every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind, every faint hum that rose and fell from the girl sleeping under his roof. His house no longer felt empty, but it did not feel like his alone anymore. And somewhere beyond the storm clouds in the vast black sky, ships moved slowly, searching. The morning came heavy with silence. James sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, but his mind was far from calm. The memory of Lyra's words from the night before echoed inside him. "If I do not sing, they find me." That single sentence had shifted his whole world. She moved quietly through the house, cleaning again, as if work could erase the fear in her eyes. James watched her from the corner of his vision, noticing the way her glowing scars dimmed and brightened with her breath. They were not normal scars. They were alive, carrying something he could not understand. Finally, he broke the silence. "Who are these hunters you speak of?" Lyra froze, her hand stilled over the rag she was using. For a moment, James thought she would ignore the question. But then she turned. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "They are slavers," she said. "They take people like me, young ones. They sell us. We are not free. We are property to them." James's grip tightened on his cup. His stomach twisted. He had heard of alien slavery in the outer colonies, but never had it felt so close, so real. She was sitting in his house, scarred by it. "How did you escape?" he asked carefully. Her eyes flickered, a storm of memories crossing her face. "There was a raid. People died. I ran. I hid in the rain. I kept running until no one followed. But they will not stop. They never stop." The way she said it made James's skin crawl. It was not just fear. It was certainty. She believed those hunters would come, and she believed they would kill to get her back. James wanted to tell her to leave, to take her danger somewhere else. But when he looked at her thin frame, the hollow in her cheeks, the trembling in her hands, he could not. She was not a soldier, not a fighter. She was a frightened girl with nowhere to go. He sighed, pushing his chair back. "Eat," he said gruffly. Sliding a plate of food toward her, she sat slowly, her fingers brushing the bread like it was treasure. She ate with small bites, almost ritual. James sat across from her, studying her. At last he asked, "Why my house? Why here?" Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time he saw tears gather. "Because you opened the door," she whispered. "No one else did." The word struck him harder than he expected. He looked away, suddenly ashamed of the thought. He had nearly left her outside. As the day went on, Lyra spoke little, but small details slipped out. She mentioned a planet name James didn't recognize. She spoke of chains that burned when she disobeyed, of collars that sang pain into her bones. She never told the full story, never gave every detail, but the fragments were enough to paint the picture. A life stolen, a freedom broken. That night, James found himself restless again. He walked through the halls, checking the windows and doors. The quiet of the house pressed on him heavier than ever. Then he heard it, the soft humming, that alien song. He followed it to the living room where Lyra sat awake, staring at the wall. Her scars glowed faintly, the marks forming patterns that shifted with her song. It was haunting, beautiful, and filled with sorrow. James leaned against the doorway. "Does it help you sleep?" Her eyes flicked to him. "It helps me remember," she whispered. "When I was little, my mother sang the same way. She told me the song could hide us. It could keep the hunters blind. Now I am alone, so I sing for myself." The pain in her voice cut deeper than the storm outside. James swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, but no words seemed enough. Instead, he sat down across from her, silent, letting the song wash over him. For a moment, he thought he saw shapes in the glow of her scars, figures of stars, maybe even faces. But when he blinked, they were gone. Finally, she stopped, her voice breaking. You should send me away. They will come and they will burn everything. They always do. James shook his head slowly. If they come here, I'll deal with it, he said, though his voice carried more doubt than strength. She studied him, her eyes shining with disbelief. You would risk your life for me? The question lingered in the air, heavy. James had no answer, not one he could put into words. He only knew that each passing moment made it harder to imagine sending her away. As silence settled again, the night deepened. Outside, a faint light blinked in the sky, too steady to be a star, too sharp to be natural. It hovered, searching, and James, though he didn't see it, had already become part of a story much larger than his quiet life could bear. The night was colder than before. The storm had passed, but the air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. James tossed in his bed, turning from one side to the other. His mind was restless, filled with Lyra's words, filled with the image of her glowing scars. At last he sat up, the silence of the house pressing against his ears. He could hear the faint hum again. Low, steady, almost like a heartbeat that did not belong to him. He pushed the blanket aside and stepped into the hallway. The wooden floor creaked under his weight. When he opened his bedroom door wider, his breath caught. Lyra was there, curled on the far side of the bed, her thin frame wrapped in the blanket she had taken from the couch. She looked small, fragile, her knees drawn to her chest. Her eyes were closed, but her scars glowed faintly. Pulsing like fire under her skin, James froze, his heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, shimmering faintly in the dark. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, her voice weak. "The dreams. They chase me. I can't be alone." James stood still, torn between anger and pity. He had told her she could use the couch, not his bed. But when he looked at her trembling form, his anger faded into something else, a deep unease mixed with a reluctant sympathy. "You can't just crawl in here," he muttered, his voice rough. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I thought maybe here the nightmares would not find me." Her words carried a weight he couldn't argue with. James sighed and rubbed his face. He had lived alone for so long, no one had ever asked to share his space, his silence, his bed. Now, an alien girl, a fugitive from hunters, was lying in the place he thought safest. He sat slowly on the edge of the bed, leaving distance between them, his body tense, his mind screaming at him to keep his guard up. But Lyra only curled tighter, like a child seeking safety. "You keep talking about nightmares," James said after a long silence. "What do you see?" Her eyes closed again, her voice trembling. "Chains, fire, faces of those who never came back. They burned homes, they cut marks into our skin. I hear their voices even when I wake. They whisper in the dark, promising they will find me again." James's chest tightened. He could almost see it through her words, the fear, the pain, the horror of her past. Her scars were not just wounds. They were reminders of chains that had tried to break her. Without thinking, he whispered, "They won't find you here." Her eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim light. "You don't believe that?" she said softly. But she gave a small smile, as if his words still mattered. They sat in silence, the distance between them heavy. James tried to rest, but every time he closed his eyes, he felt the glow of her scars like lanterns in the dark. He turned once, twice, and then finally looked at her again. She was watching him, her gaze calm but searching. "You don't trust me," she said quietly. James swallowed. "I don't know you." She nodded slowly, as if she understood. "But I trust you," she whispered. "If I didn't, I wouldn't be here." The word struck deeper than he wanted to admit. Trust was not something he received often. He lived a quiet life, kept to himself, and people rarely crossed his path. Now this girl, hunted and broken, was giving him the one thing she had left to give. The night stretched on. James's body finally gave in to exhaustion. He drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, half aware of the faint glow beside him, half aware of the strange calm it brought. But sometime deep in the night, James woke again, not from fear, but from silence. The humming was gone. The air felt heavier without it. He looked toward Lyra. She was still curled beside him, but her face twisted in pain, her lips trembling. Her scars flickered like fading stars. He reached out, before he could stop himself, placing a hand lightly on her arm. Her skin was warm, too warm. She gasped softly, eyes snapping open. For a moment, she stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. Then she whispered, "They're close." James froze. "What do you mean?" Her voice was a breath. "I felt them in the dream, they're near." He wanted to tell her it was only a nightmare, but something in her trembling voice told him otherwise. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. If she was right, if the hunters were close, then bringing her into his house had just invited danger he was not ready for. Still, when he looked at her, fragile, terrified, holding on to the edge of his bed as if it were the only thing keeping her alive, he knew he would not send her away. Not now, not ever. Outside, the night was quiet, but far beyond the clouds in the empty black sky, something moved, slow and deliberate. The next evening arrived heavy and restless. James tried to work during the day, but his thoughts stayed tangled. Every sound outside made him glance at the window. Every shadow seemed too sharp, too watchful. Lyra's warning echoed in his ears. "They're close." By nightfall, the unease had grown into something larger. He sat in the living room pretending to read, but his eyes never moved across the page. He kept glancing at the curtains, half expecting a face to appear. Lyra was quiet. She sat on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. She had cleaned the whole house again, but her hands would not stop trembling. The glow of her scars flickered like candlelight, sometimes bright, sometimes weak. James could see she was frightened, but she tried to hide it. "Are you sure?" he asked at last, his voice low. "That they're here?" She nodded without hesitation. "I can feel them. It's like a net in the air, pulling closer." James rubbed his face, frustration burning in him. He was just a man, a nobody. He wasn't ready for hunters, ships, or alien trouble, yet here he was, sitting in his living room with a fugitive who had nowhere else to go. The night deepened, and that was when he heard it. A faint sound beyond the walls. A low hum, not like the crickets or the wind, but mechanical, steady, searching. James's stomach twisted. He walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see outside. His heart lurched across the street. Under the dull streetlight, shadows moved. They weren't neighbors. They weren't people at all. Tall figures stood still, their shapes too thin, too sharp. Their eyes glowed faintly, scanning the houses one by one. James stepped back quickly, his breath caught. "They're here," he whispered. Lyra rose to her feet, her body shaking but her eyes steady. "I told you," she said softly. "They never stop." Panic gripped James. His house was small, fragile, no defense against whatever was outside. He wanted to call the police, but what could they do? They had no idea what kind of creatures these were. No one would even believe him. Lyra walked closer to him, her voice low. "If you want me to go, I will. Maybe if I run, they will leave you alone." James turned to her sharply, anger rising. "You think I'll just throw you out there? After everything?" "No." Her eyes softened, and for the first time he saw a spark of something else. Hope. The figures outside moved slowly, one step at a time, scanning the street. Searching, James's chest tightened with every movement. The shadows were hunting, and his house was on their path. He quickly turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. Lyra stood beside him, her scars glowing faintly like veins of fire. He whispered, "Hide it. Cover it up." She pulled her sleeves down, but the glow still bled faintly through the fabric. James grabbed an old blanket and wrapped it around her, smothering the light. His hands brushed her shoulders, feeling her trembling beneath. The shadows came closer. Their footsteps were slow, deliberate. James held his breath. His heart pounded so loud he thought it might give them away. Through the gap in the curtain, he saw one of them stop right outside the house, its face turned toward the window, glowing eyes scanning. For a long, endless moment it stood there, and James felt sure it could hear his heart. Then faintly, Lyra began to hum. The sound was soft, almost silent, but it filled the air like a wave. The glow of her scars pulsed in rhythm beneath the blanket. James watched in awe as the shadow outside froze, tilting its head as if confused. Then slowly it turned and walked past. The others followed, their glowing eyes sweeping over the street, but not stopping. The humming continued until their footsteps faded into the distance. When silence returned, James finally let out the breath he had been holding. He turned to Lyra, who had collapsed onto the couch, her body weak from the effort. Sweat ran down her forehead, but her eyes still glowed softly. "They didn't see us," James said in disbelief. "They will come again," she whispered, her voice faint. "The song hides me, but it can't hold them forever." James sat down beside her, his body shaking. He wanted to scream, to demand why this had become his life. But when he looked at her pale face, he stayed silent. She had saved them both with her song. The rest of the night was quiet, but it was not peace. It was the silence of a hunter walking away only to circle back later. James knew this was not over. As dawn broke, he stood at the window, watching the street with tired eyes. Shadows were gone, but he knew they hadn't truly left. They were searching, and they would return. Behind him, Lyra's voice broke the silence. "You should send me away before it's too late." James turned to her, his jaw set. "No," he said firmly. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." For the first time, Lyra smiled faintly, fragile but real. Her glowing scars dimmed to a gentle light. And in that moment, James understood that his quiet life was gone forever, replaced by something larger, something dangerous, and something he could no longer walk away from. Far above, in the dark sky, a ship hovered unseen, patient and waiting. The warning signs came just after sunset. James was sitting at the table, trying to pretend life was normal, trying to pretend that his small house was not under the gaze of unseen eyes. Lyra sat quietly across from him, nibbling at a piece of bread, her glowing scars hidden beneath a thick sweater. Her hum had not returned since the last night, but the silence felt even heavier because of it. James tried to speak, to break the tension. But before he could, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went dark. The hum of the refrigerator died. The electric clock stopped. The whole house sank into silence. James stood quickly, his stomach twisting. "Power's out," he muttered, though deep down he knew it was more than that. Lyra's eyes lifted to his, glowing faintly in the darkness. "They are here," she whispered. The ground trembled, just faintly, as if something heavy had touched down outside. James ran to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek. His heart froze. A ship hovered above the street, its body black and sharp, lights burning in strange colors along its hull. Shadows moved beneath it, those same tall, thin figures from before, but more of them now, dozens, maybe more, there. Glowing eyes cut through the night as they spread out, circling the houses like wolves. "They're not just searching this time," James said, his voice rough. "They're coming." The first blow shook the front door, a crash of metal against wood. The hinges groaned but held. James grabbed the nearest thing he could find, an old iron bar from the fireplace. His hands trembled, but he gripped it tight. "Stay back," he ordered Lyra. But she shook her head, her scars glowing brighter. "They want me, not you. If I don't fight, they'll tear everything apart." Before James could argue, the door shattered, splinters flew into the room, and the first hunter stepped inside. Its body was thin but tall, its limbs long, its face smooth except for the glowing eyes. It let out a sharp sound, like a whistle cutting through bone. James swung the iron bar with all his strength. The blow landed against the creature's shoulder, sending it staggering, but another shadow stepped through, then another. "James," Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. He turned, and what he saw froze him in awe. Lyra's scars blazed like fire across her skin. lines of light racing from her arms to her neck. Her eyes shone brighter than ever before. And when she opened, her mouth, the hum that spilled out, shook the walls. It was no longer soft, no longer a whisper. It was a roar of sound, vibrating through the air. The hunters froze, their glowing eyes flickering. Their limbs jerked as if strings had been cut. James dropped to his knees, the sound pressing against his chest, filling his bones. But while it hurt him, it destroyed the hunters. Their bodies cracked like glass under pressure, lines of light breaking through them before they shattered into dust. The hum stopped suddenly, leaving a ringing silence behind. James gasped for air, sweat dripping from his face. Lyra stood in the center of the room, trembling, her body glowing like a fading flame. But the fight was not over. Outside, more hunters moved closer. Their glowing eyes lit the yard. Their shadows stretched across the walls. The ship above hummed louder, charging something powerful. James staggered to his feet, gripping the iron bar again. "There are too many," he said, his voice breaking. Lyra shook her head, her glow dimming. "I can't do it again. Not like that. It takes too much. But we can't run. Not anymore." The ground shook as another blast hit the side of the house. The walls cracked, the ceiling groaned. Smoke and dust filled the air. James coughed, pulling Lyra toward him. "Then we fight together," he said, though he had no plan, no hope, only determination. The front yard lit up as fire rained from the ship above, burning the street, exploding. In bright bursts, the hunters advanced through the flames, their eyes locked on the house. James swung at the first that broke through the window, shattering glass. The iron bar cracked against its head, but it kept coming, claws scraping the walls. He shouted, throwing his weight into the fight. Every muscle screamed, but he refused to fall. Lyra raised her hands, her glow returning faintly. A small hum slipped through her lips, weaker than before, but still sharp. The hunter flinched, enough for James to drive the iron bar through its chest. The body dissolved into ash, but more poured in. Their numbers seemed endless. James fought, sweat and blood mixing. His body ached, bruises blooming across his skin. Every time he thought he would collapse, Lyra's faint hum gave him strength. The house burned around them. The walls cracked. The roof sagged. The air filled with smoke and the glow of fire. Yet in the chaos, James and Lyra stood side by side. Finally, with one last burst of power, Lyra screamed her song, brighter, sharper. Her body shone like a star. The hunters froze mid-step, their eyes flaring, and then, one by one, they burst into dust. The ship above let out a sound, a scream, of engines, and then it pulled back, rising into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. Silence fell, the flames crackled, the smoke thickened. The house stood broken but still standing. James dropped to his knees, gasping. His hands shook, his chest burned. He looked at Lyra, who collapsed beside him, her glow fading to almost nothing. "You saved us," he whispered, his voice raw. She shook her head weakly. "No, we saved each other." Outside, the street was littered with ash. The hunters were gone, but the night was not peaceful. It was only a pause, a warning. The fight was not finished. James looked at the ruins of his home, then at the fragile alien girl who had brought this storm into his life. And in his heart, he knew he could never turn back. The hunters would return, and when they did, he would be ready. The night had swallowed the town. The fires burned low now, reduced to smoke and glowing embers. James stood in the ruins of his living room, the smell of ash thick in the air. His house was broken, his windows shattered, the walls blackened, but he was alive, and so was Lyra. She lay on the couch, her body trembling, her glow faint as if it had been drained from her. Her eyes were half open, her breaths shallow. James knelt beside her, worry pressing against his chest. "You need to rest," he said quietly, though his own voice was raw with exhaustion. Lyra gave a weak laugh. "I always rest, but never for long. They come again and again until there's nothing left." Her words made his chest ache. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but deep down he knew she was right. The hunters had Not been defeated, only delayed. They would return stronger and angrier outside. The dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the street in a pale, fragile light. James stood and looked through the broken window. The houses of his neighbors seemed untouched, silent, as if no one else had seen or heard the battle that had nearly destroyed his home. It was as if the world had turned its face away, leaving him and Lyra alone to carry the weight. He turned back to her, his decision forming before he even realized it. You can't stay here. Not like this. Not when they know where you are. Her eyes flickered, fear sparking inside them. You want me to leave? She whispered. James shook his head firmly. No, I want us both to leave. Lyra blinked, confused. You would come with me? He sat on the edge of the couch, looking at her directly. If you go alone, you'll be caught. If you stay, they'll destroy everything. But if we leave together, maybe we have a chance. Maybe we can find somewhere they can't follow. Her lips trembled. Why? She asked softly. Why would you do this for me? James swallowed, his throat tight. He had no simple answer. At first it had been pity, then duty. But now, looking at her fragile form, her glowing scars, and the quiet strength that had carried her through horrors no one should endure, he knew the truth. Because you trusted me, he said finally, and I can't walk away from that. For the first time since she had arrived, her tears spilled. They glowed faintly in the dim light like liquid stars running down her cheeks. She reached for his hand, her fingers weak but warm. Then I am not alone anymore, she whispered. James held her hand, feeling the fragile weight of her trust. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The hunters would return and they would not stop. But something inside him had shifted. His quiet life was gone, replaced by a fire he could not put out. The rest of the day was spent gathering what little he could, supplies, tools, food, things that might help them survive. His house was ruined, but he salvaged what remained. Every sound outside kept him tense. Every shadow made him look twice. But no more hunters came, not yet. Lyra slept most of the day, her body trying to recover. When she woke, her glow was still dim, but her voice was stronger. If you come with me, they will hunt you too, she said softly. Your life will never be the same. James gave a tired smile. It already isn't. That night, when the world was quiet again, James stood in the doorway with Lyra beside him. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the sky. Somewhere up there in the dark, ships waited, predators circling. We can't stay, James said. We go tonight. Lyra nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her scars glowed faintly, like embers refusing to die. Together, they stepped out into the night, leaving the ruined house behind. As they walked down the road, Lyra looked at him, her voice small but steady. You paid me to clean your house? She whispered. But instead, you cleaned the chains from my soul. The words struck deep. James said nothing, but he felt the truth of them. His life had changed the moment he opened the door to her, and now there was no going back. Behind them, the house smoldered in silence. Ahead, the road stretched into uncertainty, and above, far in the sky, faint lights flickered. Hunters still searching, waiting for their next chance. But James no longer felt like a man standing alone. He was no longer just a quiet worker with a simple life. He had made a choice, and with that choice, his fate had bound itself to hers. Together, they walked into the unknown, hunted but unbroken. And somewhere, in the silence of the galaxy, the hunters would learn that a human and a homeless alien girl were not so easy to break.